fake being smart at chiropractic. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. When somebody asks, well, what is chiropractic? We say, well, it's a subluxation. There's nerve interference, and then we remove it, we do a nerve adjustment, and that gets rid of nerve interference. And for a lot of people, that's as deep as it goes. There's so much more to that, though. And when we're trying to establish rapport for ourselves within the medical community, the healthcare community that we're a fundamental part of, this isn't enough. You know, we're talking to nurses and endocrinologists, and if this is all we have, there's no context behind this, just philosophy. Philosophy is great, and philosophy is going to speak to normal people out on the street who haven't learned what we've learned, but when you're talking to doctors, we need to up it a level. And so that's what we're going to be working on today. I need everybody to get a piece of paper out and a pencil, because you're going to need to take a couple notes as we do this. We're about to go warp speed. I'm going to be pointing out words I want you to write down, and you just follow as best as we can, okay? Here we go. So, the subluxation. When a vertebra gets locked into a misalignment, it loses its normal range of motion. We all know that. You have a PRS, it can't go left, and it can't close on that side. So it's not moving the way it's supposed to. And this decreased motion leads to decreased depolarization, right? Depolarization, that's a money vocab word. You drop depolarization, you sound smarter. Whether you fully understand what it means or not, as long as you use this in your explanation, you're going to gain rapport. It's associated muscle spindles, Golgi tendon organs embed in the surrounding paraspinals and the joint capsules. And we know this. All of our spine is super heavily innervated. And what's it innervated by? It's Pacinian corpuscles, Ruffini endings, muscle spindles, all these complex things we learned in Sys-Phys, we need to reuse because they explain what we do. These fire off and they activate 1A, 1B afferents. Remember these? This was Sys-Phys, this was basic neurology that we learned here at the beginning. Now this altered frequency of firing. Frequency of firing means that normally the neurons from your spine are going at all times. But now you're subluxated, they're not able to depolarize and they're not able to fire. So now they're going slower than they should be. Frequency of firing, write that one down. That's a good vocab word to throw in there. This becomes a pathological signal that ascends to the cortex, brainstem, and cerebellum. If you're going to be talking about the brain to medical people, just say cortex. Cortical. Like, all of a sudden you have cortical dampening. It's not getting the input it's meant to have. And this is called disafferentation. You guys have heard of the disafferentation model before. This is how we explain it because most medicine hasn't heard disafferentation. But throw disafferentation in there, and now we can explain it to them. Different nuclei in the brain that are postsynaptic to this input begin to wither through diastasis. So write down postsynaptic and write down diastasis. So this is like fundamental to our understanding of why chiropractic does what it does. Diastasis means there are two areas of the nervous system that are anatomically separate but functionally connected. And what that means is that the spine is not in the brain, it's anatomically different, but it's functionally connected. There's neurons that go from the spine to the brain. The brain is postsynaptic, it receives the input on the other end of that synapse. So what happens is when the spine stops working, through changes in diastasis, the brain doesn't receive the input, and now the brain dampens. This is not a chiropractic word. This is a law of neurobiology, neurophysiology, diastasis. Write down diastasis. Now that you know what it means, you can use this in your lingo, and it's like a friggin' Uzi. I don't know, it's powerful. All right. Cortical demise. Brain starts to fail because it's not getting the input that it needs from the spine. As these nuclei drop in their central integrated state, they fall into transneural degeneration. Right, central integrated state and right, transneural degeneration. Those are good words. Central integrated state is going to be a sum of all of the activation and inhibition going on in the nucleus at one time, which means that, let's just say this is a nucleus in our brain and we have different synapses firing on it all the time. It's integrating all that information, processing it all the time. And now you have less things firing into it because they're not coming from the spine because they have a lower frequency of firing. and the central integration of this nuclei drops. Does that make sense? Now you can use central integrative state in your vocabulary. Now, transneural degeneration is going to be the end product of a lowered central integrative state. Transneural degeneration is transneural across neurons, and we talked about that. You go through the neurons to the brain to different neurons. Degeneration breaks down. And this is fundamental to our understanding of chiropractic and chiropractic neurology. Transneural degeneration is going to occur in our brains after we've been subluxated. For years, we've been suffering from subluxation. Now our brain just starts getting less and less and less and sicker. And now our brain can't fire and activate the way it's supposed to, and we lose functions. So write down TND. Areas of the vestibular, autonomic, parietal, cerebellar, and anterior cingulate systems begin to fail, and their output becomes aberrant. So what this means is that areas of the brain that the spine is firing to, and it's firing to so much of the brain, autonomic, vestibular, it means that you can just say a couple of these parts in the brain that it's firing to, and through this process, these parts start to fail. Does that make sense? So throw out some basic brain areas that are activated by the spine. You don't need to know in detail what they all do or in detail all the pathways, but by using words like this, you sound smarter. And their output becomes aberrant. So again, if we're trying to input our vestibular system through input in our spine's not working, our vestibular system isn't working, it's not able to function the way it is, and we get sick. Our vestibular system becomes aberrant. Finally, disease. Functional losses manifest in many neurally driven processes and symptoms develop. We just talked about that. This maladaptation lessens the afflicted individual's ability to experience and react to life. And this is kind of coming back to chiropractic philosophy, is that you can't live at your max if you're subluxated. And of course we all believe that, but now we have a neurologic explanation on how that's happening. And this is mecha-vitalism coming back. But the mechanisms and the vitalism are connected. You can use one to explain the other. Everybody suffers from subluxation. Everybody loses cortical capabilities. So now we've explained subluxation. Well, what does the chiropractor do? They remove nerve interference. Well, the adjustment restores motion to the segment, thus facilitating its afferent barrage. Afferent barrage is a really neat word. Basically, afferents are inputs that are going up to the brain, right, and activating it. And barrage is just going to say how much of it's going on. You adjust somebody, and instead of going up, it speeds up again. Up. The normal afferents to the brain. Degenerated cell bodies begin to heal, restoring their natural capabilities to integrate and modulate environmental stimuli. Integration and modulation are like so much, because you can just throw them in there, not fully understanding what they mean, but you got an idea, and you know that the brain integrates information better when you're adjusted. And you can better modulate your sympathetics when you're adjusted. All right, lastly, the patient's brain becomes rehabilitated and focal nuclei reach long-term potentiation. Write down long-term potentiation. That's another good one to have. LTP basically means that the neurons in the brain are going to be closer to threshold and they'll fire off easier. I'm going to be like 3 more minutes. You're going to be able to activate different parts of your brain easier and quicker when you're in a state of long-term potentiation. Overall, the brain is functioning at its highest capabilities because they're adjusted and they're not subluxated. Thereafter, the individual's metabolic threshold is increased. They're able to reach neuroplasticity with less influence, experience a higher quality of life. So write down neuroplasticity for your list. You can write down metabolic threshold. All these are basically saying is that the brain is able to better recognize the environment, integrate that information, react to it. And when you use words like neuroplasticity, which is what we do, we stimulate neuroplasticity in the brain with the adjustment, it gains you respect. Does this make sense? But this is, again, not just science. I mean, the experience of higher quality of life, how many times have we said that from a blank philosophical perspective without anything to back up what we really believe? But not that we believe, that we know. And so, here's my takeaways. We can use advanced vocabulary to assert professionalism in the medical community. I was talking to my grandmother's friend. He's 75 years old, and he's been an immunologist for the last 40 years. And back in 1970, some chiropractor told him that subluxations cause nerve interference, which adjustments, remove nerve interference, and that was it. And for the next 40 years, he thought we were crazy. He thought like it's just philosophy, it's just mumbo jumbo, it has no real place in science or healthcare. And so I meet the guy and I start talking slowly, and I'm using the vocabulary that we know. By the way, the vocabulary we covered today isn't out of your league. Most of those words you guys have learned in your classes here, or you will learn. We know this stuff. It's not that we're faking being smart, it's that we actually are smart. We really have learned all this stuff. We have all this language, we just don't use it. Because for some reason, chiropractors become flustered. When we're trying to explain ourselves, we lose control and we say things we don't really mean. When we have all this knowledge backing us that we've put time into learning, we should use it. We should show off with it too. So look, understand the premise of chiropractic is supported through the fundamental laws of neurology. This is my biggest takeaway is I'm a scientifically based vitalist. This is pretty unique, I think, in the field, but all of what I was just explaining is not chiropractic. It's neurology. That's how the brain functions, with or without chiropractic. They've discovered that in medical research, okay? But when you start seeing the connections and visualizing how it's all working together from a science perspective, I gain more respect and more belief that chiropractic works for everybody, every time. The last part is have immense pride. There is no product or service on the planet that compares to what we provide. I mean, there's nothing else that will light somebody's nervous system up, turn their life back on, get their brain working again. We have the best friggin' product on the planet. And sometimes we walk around with our tail behind our legs, feeling inferior for some insane reason. What we do works. There's nothing that compares to it. So, thank you guys. If anybody wants my PowerPoint, email me and I'll send it to you. But use these words and let's gain a better place in chiropractic, in healthcare, where we can talk to the medical community and defend ourselves like professionals. Cool, thank you guys.